went to the military, and I remember like my second day or something in there, and they were lining us up and handing us rifles, and I'm going like, you know, you actually are gonna trust me with this, you know. I don't even trust me with this, you know. So it was a rude awakening, and but it was a good experience for me.
What year was this?
That was 1967, April.
When you go into when you enlist in the Army, you're 17 years old, you've dropped out of
Mhm.
high school, 1967. Did you at least have some awareness that there was a conflict going on in Southeast Asia?
I mean, I knew there was something going on. Yeah, I knew that, but not to any depth. I wasn't really paying a lot of attention to it.
So you didn't, when you raised your hand and, took the oath to go into the Army,
Hmm.
you didn't have in your mind that, you know, within a year you might be in the middle of a war in Southeast Asia. You didn't connect you going into the Army with a war in Southeast Asia, and these two facts might come together. That really wasn't in your mind when you first went in?
Well, it was a I knew it was a possibility,
Okay.
but I was 17, and I just didn't have a concern right then and there. Anyway, I was sent to Vietnam and was told that we need perimeter guard, armed escort for convoys and tower guards. That's what we need, and that's what I did. I was we ran a lot of convoys between Anke, I'm sorry, between Queen Yan, Anke, and Pleiku and back, going up to Anke Pass. A lot of ambushes and things like that, and I was doing it on a rotational basis. And the other times I was perimeter guard.
So it sounds to me like your training was supply, but you go to Vietnam and and if you're doing supply, correct me if I'm wrong, my assumption would be if you're working supply in Vietnam, you're not going to be in a lot of combat situations, probably. But it sounds like you had trained for that, but when you get to Vietnam, you're actually in a fair number of combat situations.
Yeah, I was at the 240 Quartermaster Battalion. They ran, like as I mentioned, the convoys to those places. And when they needed somebody to do that, it was my turn. My name was in there. I'm up, so I did that. And when I wasn't doing that, I was in a 20-foot guard tower, or on a perimeter guard, or escorting engineers, riding shotgun on a convoy, basically. So, you're there in the passenger seat of a truck, bringing supplies up and down, Route 19, and sometimes they got ambushed. Now, I was never on a convoy that got ambushed, but the one before and the one after,
Hmm.
and then it was like, I don't know, it was like Russian roulette. It just never happened while I was doing it, which I was fortunate about.
Wow.
But and during TET, there's a lot of people, they talk about the infantry, and they're out in the jungle and all that, and that's cool, but they don't really pay attention to the fact that there are people in these far-flung, way out of the way outposts that during TET, everything was under attack at the same time. And so Quinyan was attacked, we were attacked, we called in the Air Force to F4 Phantoms. We had to call them in to just around our little spot, napalm, bombs, those kind of things.
Where were you when Tet hit?
Phu Thai Valley.
Butai Valley. What's your first memory of Tet? I'm sort of interested in this process. Like, okay, you have a sense that something's breaking, and then it's going to unfold over the next several hours or days. What's your first, the first memory you have that something, this huge thing that we now just refer to as Tet, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
What was your first inkling that something was breaking, or the first thing that happened that indicated to you that something unusual was underway?
They attacked my compound.
So that was pretty
I,
straightforward.
I was pretty straightforward. Yeah, I was playing ping pong at the time. I just got there not too long ago. I'm playing ping pong with my friend. All of a sudden, I'm seeing these tracers come across, and I'm like standing with a ping pong paddle in my hand, and he takes off, and he sees me still standing there, and he runs back, and he says, "Mike, you got to go back to your tent, get your weapon, and get on the perimeter." I'm like waking up now to what's actually happening, and
Wow.
so I'm running, I'm running in the direction of the fire because my compound's over here and I got to get to my stuff. So I'm running in there to that direction and I grab my stuff and I'm headed to the compound. Matter of fact, that picture I sent you was the day after it was over. And
Mhm.
I'm getting first hot food in the weeks.
So
Go ahead.
initially these traces are coming from some distance then as the attack is just beginning?
They were coming across the compound. I was next to another compound. And I'm going to mine. And I grab my stuff, and as I'm running to the perimeter, I see the sergeant major firing a Thompson machine gun in the opposite direction, and I'm going, Sergeant Major, what are you shooting at? He goes, the enemy, son, they're coming. I couldn't help it, but I dropped everything in my hand out of my hand. I just it just struck me as very funny. When you're 18, everything's funny and everybody doesn't think it's funny, but you, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I gathered up my stuff and went on the perimeter and kind of stayed there when I wasn't doing other stuff, guarding this and escorting this and staying on the perimeter until we got out of that particular situation.
How long did that whole attack last, roughly?
That lasted about, well, we were there for like a week on the perimeter, like maybe a week and a half. We were there. They weren't attacking all the time, but we were there and we were getting support from the the gunships that were going hovering over our spot, and we were pretty important because we pumped jet fuel from Quinyon all the way to Pleiku to the Air Force to jet fuel and diesel and regular MOGAS. We would and they needed that stuff and either send big 5-ton tankers or pump through the pipeline. And they regularly attacked the pipeline, and we had to guard that as well. So there was a lot of stuff going on.
So the fuel that's going to these other sites in Vietnam, it's originating where you are,
Near, very close to where
near where you are.
Cunyon is the main. There's a deep water port there, and that's where it would come in there, and it would be pumped all the way up to Pleiku and further, and even further. But we were in charge of it from to Pleiku.
Did they breach the perimeter?
No,
Okay.
no, but they fired motors and rockets and sniper fire and that kind of thing into it. They did in other places, like in Cunyon, which was a bigger place. They attacked and took over the radio station, and they held it for a whole bunch of time, several hours. And then the Vietnamese military security office, they took that over, you know, and held that for like a day. And we were underneath the support command, which was in Quinyon, and we were like right next to Quinyon. So we could see what was going on even there as well as where we were. I fired at some people. I may have hit somebody. I mean, maybe not. I mean, I fired. I qualified as an expert on the M14 rifle, but it was kind of a lot of far away, a lot of it, and so it's hard for me to tell.
So you were still using the M14. They hadn't given you the M16.
No, uh, no. And when I was on my in the guard tower, I had an M14 there as well.
Yeah. Um, Now, what time you're playing ping pong and then all of a sudden here come the tracers and then you realize, the
This was like in the afternoon. This is like in the afternoon. late
Okay.
afternoon. Yeah.
So the afternoon, and this might be too much, detail. I understand, you're not paying a whole lot of attention to things or just not aware of the big picture. Is it the afternoon, um,
On the 31st
of the afternoon of the
January.
31st? So things had started the early morning and it was still rolling. And so,
Yeah.
and you're saying that, then where you were, it's being hit off and on for over several days.
Yeah.
Okay. In your tour in Vietnam, was that the most significant combat experience that you had in that?
Well, well, combat experience. There was another. There was a situation where this guy was. He was actually AWOL. He was in our our compound, and he was playing with a grenade,
Yeah.
and somebody was trying to help him put the pin back in, and it went off, and it killed both of them. I kind of suppressed that because I remember hearing the explosion because it was right next to my tent. I lived in a 10-man tent. But I didn't, and there was a lot of people who used to come to our tent to talk to my friends who were there, my tent mates were there, not necessarily talk to me. And then all of a sudden I didn't see him anymore, and then I didn't really connect anything. And here recently I've been getting together with a guy who was in that tent with me, and he would ask me, did I remember this person or that person? And I didn't. I said, no, I don't remember, like this. And then I realized that, especially when the grenade incident, I remember hearing the explosion, and that was the guy had 10 days left to go home too, which was bad. I got a Dear John letter while I was there.
Uh-oh. Probably should be laughing, but well, you're laughing now too.
Yeah, well, it was funny. There was a plan. I was going to be a lawyer. She was going to be a teacher. We were going to get married, live happily ever after. And then she wrote me a letter, said, Michael, I'm marrying Tom. Okay. I didn't deal with it the way other people dealt. I've known other people deal with the same thing there even, and they were like, all weepy and all that, and like we have enough to cry about. We didn't need to add other stuff, and some of them would want to do dangerous things and put themselves at extra risk,
Yeah.
and some of them, did things to themselves, in general. I was too vain to do that, so that wasn't going to happen to me. So I said, okay, that's just the way it is.
That's it. Let's go back in time a little bit. When did you actually arrive in Vietnam?
November 11th.
November 11th, 67.
Mm-hmm.
And where did you land at Tan Son Nhut or Benoit?
Cam Ranh.
Cam Ranh is where you arrived.
And then when I got there, as soon as the door opened, a heat just jumped on my body and stayed there for a whole 12 months. That's how that was working.
Yeah. So that was your first impression of Vietnam, the heat.
Yeah, that one. And then they put me on guard duty on a little island, and gave me a rifle I'd never fired before, and told me they'll come and get me in the morning. I was supposed to look out for swimmers and that kind of thing. And I'm like, this is crazy, right? And then the next day I got shipped to Quy Nhon and then Phu Thai.
Phu Thai. Um, what was the first thing? Well, let me back up and ask about the long series of flights from the States to Vietnam. Do you have any recollections about those flights, about just kind of the feel of things on the plane? Did things kind of gradually change I'm imagining you're taking a number of different flights that eventually get you to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Do things get increasingly serious as you get closer to Vietnam, or do you have
Well,
any
I
recollections of that flight?
yeah. I started taking things a little seriously, maybe too seriously in many ways. We left out of Fort Lewis, Washington, and the closer I'm getting, I'm thinking I could get killed over here. Uh, I
Mm.
could be captured over here, or there. I hadn't got there yet, but I was thinking about that. And I'm not normally a negative person, but I was really thinking about that. And I looked, I happened to look out the window, and I saw a very bright figure, so bright you didn't know, what it was, in between two wheels, and it was moving alongside the plane. So I asked the guy next to me, "What do you think that is?" And he looked, he goes, "I don't see anything." And he said, "It's probably just a light from the plane, And so I did like this, and it still was there. And then I just gradually felt more at ease, so to speak. And toward the end of it, I knew that nothing was going to happen to me in Vietnam. I knew that before I even got there. And that was my attitude throughout the whole time, the whole tour.
So that light you saw, you took that as a sort of a divine sign or something like that?
I think it was an angel myself,
Wow, because the guy next to you didn't see it.
because he didn't see it.
So you had those feelings of, anxiety and thinking about it might get killed, it might get captured. Then you see that, and then it's almost like just your feelings changed and you kind of settled and
I
felt
did.
that you were going to be okay.
I thought I was going to be okay. Exactly.
Did that feeling hold? We were talking about TET, even through TET, even as you're engaged in a firefight,
The whole time.
was that sense there the whole time?
The whole time. The whole year.
Wow. Hmm. What was the first thing you saw? You mentioned and I've heard this story. I've heard this so many times from vets. The door on the plane opens and everybody's smacked with that heat and
Yeah,
that humidity.
that's right. That's right.
Um, what's the first thing you saw, heard, experienced that drove home to you the point that you really were in a combat zone?
I think when they start shooting,
Well, okay, that would be pretty clear.
there's
Yeah.
a wake up. There's a wake up call. Yeah,
How
definitely.
how how long had you been there when that happened?
I was there for it was I got there in November, and it happened in January.
Is this Tet you're referring to?
Yeah. Hmm.
So Tet was your first experience of combat then.
Yeah, pretty much.
What's the basic outline then of the work you did? You mentioned that you're a perimeter guard, you're guarding towers, you're also doing convoys, you're guarding this pipeline. Just describe in general your work during that 12-month tour.
Well, you're basically sitting in a truck with somebody else driving, and you're going up the Anke Pass where all the ambushes happen. And it seemed like one day bled into the other for the most part. You didn't know what day it was actually, except for a few times. And it was the regular routine: guard tower, perimeter guard. I guarded the doctors and the nurses in the medical detachment down not too far down the road. Engineers on the beach there who were like with these big bulldozers and stuff. I would be sitting there riding shotgun with them. I mean, that was basically my life for a year.
Sure. Did you have any interactions with Vietnamese civilians? And I say civilians, understanding that you're not really sure a lot of the times whether this person is a civilian or VC. But did you have much interaction with Vietnamese?
Um, you saw the picture I sent you. You saw the Vietnamese guy with the pith helmet on, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, he. I was the guy who was. I'm sitting in a Jeep, right? And that was the colonel's Jeep, by the way. And the driver was the other guy in the picture. And he thought he was from Virginia. He didn't think it was good for somebody at my age not to know how to drive, which I didn't. I'm from New York, so we don't need to know how to drive in New York. So he took it upon himself to teach me how to drive. So I learned how to drive in Vietnam
Hmm.
on a Jeep, Army Jeep.
Yeah.
That's how I learned.
You're right. And I forgive me, I don't know that. I'm assuming the Jeep is manual.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, I think that's all they have at that time. Maybe I'm not sure, but
That's right.
manual on the dirt roads of Vietnam is where you learned how to drive.
exactly.
In the photo, then, you've got this Vietnamese man.
Yeah.
Um, so did that person just happen to be in the photo, or did you work with that person? Did you know who it
No,
was?
no. I mean, he worked on the compound, and we see him all the time. He knows he's laughing, and he was cool. And then there was the house with a house girl too. We had a house girl who did our laundry and stuff like that.
Did you feel like you could trust them?
Those two, yeah, yeah. They were like fixtures and stuff like that. And there was one guy who the officers thought was a VC, but he cut hair, right?
Mm,
He knew how to cut black people's hair.
mm.
So we all liked him. And then they said he was a VC, so they kicked him off the compound. So we went on strike. We weren't going to get any haircuts if he wasn't going to do it. So then they finally brought him back, and I guess they did some sort of security thing, whatever.
Oh. How about South Vietnamese forces? Did you have any interaction with ARVN forces at all?
Not a lot, not a lot. I didn't really we didn't really deal with them a whole lot. I mean, the Korean Army was there. We dealt with them,
Mm,
and we also. You ever hear of Hanjin Trucking Company?
no. Mm-mm.
Okay, that's a Korean civilian trucking company.
Yeah.
Who these guys would? I mean, they were phenomenal. Okay, they would go through firefights, whatever. They were just driving. Okay, this is what they were doing, and they were tough, tough customers and really really good people. The forces were also pretty tough. I mean, there's no question about that. You know, they would go through a lot of times while I was there. I didn't see this, but while I was there, some one of their guys had got uh, killed in a village, and so they were going, you know, do a sweep. And the American officers told them, well, you can do all that, but you gotta drop leaflets first and let them know you're coming.
Mm.
They burned that village to the ground, and then they dropped leaflets, okay, around
Afterwards.
afterwards. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they were not. They were no joke.
Suppose, you said that when TEP breaks out, you're playing ping pong. But I did want to ask you, TEP breaks out early morning of the 31st. It doesn't get to where you are by the afternoon. Were you even aware that something big was unfolding in South Vietnam at that time?
No, I was not.
Wow. So let's say, you're there, you're interacting, you're playing ping pong or something, and one of your buddies just says, so why are we here? What's this all about? Um, what do you think you might have said at that time?
Well, I joined the army and I raised my hand. That made me subject to whatever was going to happen on that level while I was still in the army. And at that point, I trusted our government to use our lives as though they were valuable and not get into stuff unless it was important, like World War II, that kind of thing. And so I trusted them. And then, of course, I read about while I was there, I read about with the Tonkin Gulf deal, and I realized there's something shady here, and it just started to dawn on me that they were using our patriotism to do what they wanted to get done, and I realized that after a while, and I guess I would have said. It depends on when they would have asked, I guess, but I would have maybe said, I trusted these people, and now they didn't do the right thing. They took the patriotism of others and used it to for whatever they were trying to do. And but then I realized, you know what, that's here I am. This is where I am, and my job is to get back home, and that's what I'm going to do.
Hmm.
And I concentrated on that.
When you think about your year there, and perhaps you've already answered this question, what memory most stands out in your mind? I guess maybe the way to set it up is, if you're just somewhere and your mind is drifting and then it drifts back to Vietnam, is there is there a memory or two that seems to be stronger than others as you look back on that year?
Well, I mean, there's a couple, I mean, there was Martin Luther King was killed while we were there, and so was Kennedy. And the local racist in the unit uh, went and got this American Indian and got them all blasted. And they all came in the day room one day. We're all sitting there, and the indigenous brother said that Martin Luther King a troublemaker, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, now we knew that we knew they had set this up, right? So we kind of just politely put him aside to the corner. He was already blasted, right? We put him in the corner so he didn't get hurt, and then we proceeded to, you know, exact a little justice for doing that kind of thing. Was setting that situation up to make sure that we were there when he heard it. So we made sure they were. Well,
So this was April 68.
yes.
Yeah, when that happened. I think April
Mm-hmm.
4, so maybe the news got, of course, Vietnam's a day ahead, so I guess in Vietnam it's April 5, and then you probably actually get the news April 6th.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What impact did that event have? And you mentioned King, you mentioned Kennedy. Around the same time, President Johnson says he's not going to run for re-election. He looks defeated. There's that first half of 68 is a really tough time in American history.
Mm-hmm.
But how did that news land among you guys there where you were?
Well, we thought people were going crazy, and we didn't like it, of course. I mean, that was not we're not happy. They were trying to have little meetings and race relations meetings and things like that, because there was a couple of fights here and there, and it was, I guess, the world for me was because now I'm almost 18, okay, and I'm opening my eyes to and making me pay more attention to what's going on in the world and in the United States. What was happening. It's just it was a turmoil uh, period of time, but there was a lot of stuff going on, and then you have your job to do. So it was like actually the job was even today. I mean, staying busy is very important to me. You mentioned something about sitting back and let my mind wander and stuff like that. I can't do that because once that happens, then I'm back there and I'm smelling the smells and I'm feeling the heat.
On the one hand, you've described that you have a sense of peace as an individual. You feel confident that you're going to make it. You also expressed this feeling, like you didn't use these words, but my interpretation is this war doesn't make a lot of sense. And now you're getting news that 1968 is a rough year for Martin Luther King's assassination, and what follows that immediately is part of that. I mean, did it feel like kind of the whole world was coming unglued? This Vietnam situation doesn't make sense. What's going on back in the home country seems like that place is cracking up. Is that kind of what it felt like for a while at that time?
I tried not to how can I put it. Well, he spoke out against the war.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's I've heard people speak against the war before, but this was different. Him doing it as opposed to anybody else, and I think that it felt like people back here was going through some things, but I kind of had to worry about what I was doing, so I don't
Focus.
myself you know
Sure.
start thinking about stuff like that, and next thing you know, you're you're not around anymore. So I had to focus on getting my behind back home. That was my thing. I had problems with, there was a special kind of protester. They had this group, um, after I got back, they were looking up the obituaries of the soldiers who were killed in Vietnam and calling their parents and saying, I'm glad your kid died in Vietnam. Okay. So that bothered me. And matter of fact, one of my closest friends, we grew up together and went to elementary school together and junior high and high school. He was a protester, and it was interesting because I come home on leave, we just get together and we just talk like we always talk. It wasn't, but he knew I was a soldier and he was a protester. We laughed about it a lot, but it wasn't a big ideological thing. Our friendship was more important than what was going on.
So there's the long flight to Vietnam in November 67. There's the flight home, November 68. How was the Michael Bracey on the way to Vietnam, or how was the Michael Bracey on the way home from Vietnam different from the one who arrived a year before? How, as you look back on that young man now, not even 20 years old, as you look back on him, how had he changed in that year in Vietnam?
I think I think he grew up a lot, quick, fast, and in a hurry. I think he was a lot smarter. He was more careful. He was maybe too vigilant, maybe
Mm.
about his surroundings than he needed to be. It's perfect for today.
Mm.
Back then, it was like, no, that's too much. And I think, and he was just happy. I remember for the past year, I had a helmet, right, and I had 300, a short time calendar on
Mm.
my helmet. 365 little space. I color one in every day just till the day that I get to go. And I got a picture of me on the day I was leaving, and I look pretty happy in that picture. So I can remember every time I see that picture, I go, yeah, I remember that feeling. So I guess I was just happy to be home. I mean, that was the thing.
You re-enlist in the army and then go back to Southeast Asia, although this
Hmm.
time to Thailand,
Hmm.
72 to 74.
Hmm.
U.S. military combat forces advisors are out of Vietnam in
Hmm.
73. So when you go to Thailand, the war in Vietnam is very much winding down, and
Hmm.
the hope is that South Vietnam will be able to finish the job on its own. You're there in 74, then after the last of the combat troops have left Vietnam.
Hmm.
When you look back on that time in Thailand, does that, in your mind, is that kind of your involvement in the Vietnam War Part Two, or was that something completely separate? How much, I guess the question is, how much of a presence was the winding down Vietnam War in your mind, in your work, when you're actually there in Thailand?
Well, when I was in Thailand, I was in finance. The only the purpose for this the place where I was to go. Groups had to go into Vietnam to get remains. That's what they were doing. They were long range reconnaissance patrol people who were leaving Thailand to go to Vietnam to bring back remains of American soldiers. So that was the only thing that had to do with Vietnam when I got there, because they were they were doing that. And
And this was something that you were aware of, that, oh, we've
oh
got
yeah,
some
well,
marks here.
we lived with the people who did that work. I didn't do that work, but
Yeah.
we lived with the people who did. They were our friends. They go in the morning a lot of times, come back maybe a day or two later with the remains, and they would hang out until it's time to go back again and get some more.
One of the things you've done is a professional researcher into topics related to wars going back to the Revolutionary War.
Hmm.
Is that a reflection of your service in Vietnam? Do you have an interest in things military and military history because of your year in Vietnam?
Well, absolutely. Veterans. I'm interested in helping. You look at my resume. Pretty much every job is like dealing with veterans in some way, shape, or form. And I've had some very interesting cases. I think there was one I'm going to tell you about. That this guy was a long range reconnaissance patrol guy, and he these guys they put sensors on the road. They kidnap people, they assassinate people, and then come back in. This is
Hmm.
what they do. It's like usually 5 or 6 of them,
Yeah.
and you take pictures too. Well, this one they got into a they're not really set up for a stand up fight, but they got into one, and it was during a rainstorm, thunderstorm,
Wow.
and this guy got struck by lightning during this thunderstorm and the firefight.
Jeez.
They disengaged. They tried to resuscitate him. They couldn't. They wrapped him in a poncho, put him in a helicopter, sent him back to the morgue, and he woke up 8 hours later inside of a body bag. Now you know there's no zippers on the inside of a body bag, right? And so the morgue attendant comes out and says, "Wow, shocked." Goes, "I was going to put this on your foot, this tag that said KIA struck by lightning." So what he did was, he cut his because they hadn't emptied his pockets yet, so he still has knife. That's how he could cut himself out of the body bag. So
Wow.
when he gets out of the body bag, um, they send him to the hospital. He's there for a couple of days. And they sent him back to his unit, but they didn't tell his unit that he was coming. So they had already had a memorial service for him with the rifle and the helmets and that kind of thing. He comes walking in and they're jumping out of windows because he's supposed to be dead. All right. So, so he gets out to Vietnam, puts a PTSD claim in, and that's the best one I've ever heard. And the VA answers back, "We know you got struck by lightning, but how do we know it happened in Vietnam?" Yeah, that's where that goes. So he hired me to find it. And it wasn't easy, but it was easy. Because when I looked at it, there's 4 light infantry brigades that they parcel out these rangers to be the long range reconnaissance patrol people. Okay, that's what they do. So I went to the first light infantry brigade I found, and there it was right there. So instead of 60 boxes to go through, I only had to go through one. So I called them up and said, "Hey, I got it was a daily staff journal, one of the basic documents that we use for documentation for veterans to help them. And it said enlisted men struck by lightning, failed to resuscitate KIA. That's what it said. It had his name and everything. So I called him up and
Wow.
told him, "Hey man, come on, come. Where do you want me to send this?" I found it. And he goes, "No, you just hold on to that, man. I'm coming right up." He drove all the way from Pennsylvania to Maryland just to pick that up. There's another guy who was he was a one of those cryptologist kind of guys, and he served with special forces and everything. And they would go set up radio intercepts on the other side of the DMZ
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff. Well, he was in Okinawa, so he would go for 3 months and then go back. And after a month or so, they sent him back again for another 3 months. So he's starting to get older and sicker and all that, and he ends up applying for benefits, and they said, "Look, we don't have any record of you being in Vietnam at all." So no, that was it.
Wow.
And I wasn't. There was some divine intervention on this one too, because I wasn't too good. Didn't think about the prospects. Were going to be too good, but I got enough. I gathered 43 documents at the archives that proved his narrative that he had said, all of it, down from the helicopters that took them over and all that kind of stuff, and the army asking the Army in Vietnam asking for people with that type of MOS, and then saying basically, don't get them from get them from overseas, and TDY. That way we don't have to let everybody know what we're doing, that kind of thing.
I see, yeah.
So to hide that, they hit it so well that he doesn't even have it on his record, but now he does. And I did an affidavit, and in addition to a summary of the documents, I did an affidavit, and the affidavit was actually cited in the Board of Veterans Appeals decision. And they said, according to the affidavit by the experienced military researcher, or they call me the military researcher, right? That it all came together for him. And this guy, man, he doesn't care about the money so much as he cares about people thinking he was a liar, people, that he was faking and all that. And he had this Vietnam veteran hat. He kept it in the basement. He said, I don't want to wear it because I don't have proof and this, that, and the other. Man, now he dusted it off. He called me up when he got the decision. He was in tears. He was in tears, and he thanked me for that. And it's a good feeling for me. Having worked at the Board of Veterans Appeals myself, knowing what kind of stuff they need in order to make a decision, it's going to help the veteran. So I've been doing that for since I got out. I've been working mainly for veterans, and that's had to do with my service.